It started on a Tuesday. The kind of Tuesday you don't remember because nothing memorable ever happens on Tuesdays. And that was precisely the sort of day I needed after the week I'd had, full of pointless meetings, unanswered emails, and a creeping sense that something in my life was slowly unraveling in ways I couldn't quite put my finger on. But I felt it anyway, like the faint scent of smoke before you find the fire. And so when I finally signed the lease on the house, a modest two-story place, nestled at the edge of a sleepy little town called Ashmere, I told myself this would be the beginning of something better, a new chapter, maybe even a quiet one for once, because I had convinced myself that all I needed to feel grounded again was silence, distance, and a fresh start. And this house, with its wide porch and creaky floorboards, its wild garden overtaking, the side yard and that ever so slight lean to the left like a drunk who could still walk straight, felt just right in the wrong sort of way, familiar and strange all at once. Like a place I'd dreamed about as a child and forgotten until now, though I dismissed that thought the moment it popped into my head, because I've never been the kind of person who believes in signs or omens or dreams that mean anything more than your subconscious purging nonsense. And yet when I walked through the front door for the first time, there was a cold draft that didn't match the weather, like the house exhaled around me, sizing me up the way animals do when they're not sure if you're a threat or a meal. But I laughed it off, chalking it up to bad insulation, because I wanted to believe in the simplicity of things, and by the time night came, I was too exhausted from unpacking to care that my phone didn't have a signal, or that the power flickered every time the wind blew, or that the old grandfather clock in the hallway had started ticking on its own despite having no pendulum, and I was just happy to be alone in a place that didn't expect anything from me. Not yet anyway. And I fell asleep faster than I had in weeks. No dreams, no interruptions, just the black embrace of real rest, until something pulled me awake around 3 a.m. Something soft and distant at first, like the sound of a branch tapping against the window, only it wasn't a branch, and it wasn't wind, and it wasn't my imagination either, because when I sat up in bed and strained to listen, I heard it again. 3 knocks, slow and deliberate, coming from the front door, and I remember staring at the ceiling for a moment, confused, trying to convince myself it must have been the house settling, or a raccoon or some other rational thing that didn't involve people or shadows or things that waited for 3:03 in the morning to make themselves known. But the knocks came again, exactly the same, as though someone or something was announcing its presence with a rhythm and certainty that felt deeply wrong, not frantic or demanding, but patient, like it had all the time in the world. And I hesitated, because every part of my body told me not to go to that door, that nothing good waits outside at that hour, but I'm not the kind of man who scares easily, or at least I didn't think I was until that night. So I got up, pulled on my hoodie, and made my way down the stairs in the dark, because the light switch wouldn't work, and every step creaked beneath me like the house was trying to scream a warning I didn't yet understand. And when I reached the door, I stood there for a long time, hand hovering over the knob, heart beating too fast for comfort, listening to the silence that had returned so suddenly it felt deafening. And when I finally opened the door, there was nothing. No one on the porch, no footprints in the dirt path, no rustle of movement in the hedges or trees, just the stillness of a world that had paused for a moment to let something slip through, something that didn't leave marks because it didn't need to. And I closed the door, double-locked it, told myself I was being paranoid, told myself maybe it was just some kid playing a prank, even though this wasn't the kind of town where kids roamed at night, not from what little I'd seen, and I went back to bed feeling stupid for letting it get to me. But the next night, it happened again. And the night after that, always at 3:03 a.m., always 3 knocks, always no one there, and I stopped checking after the 4th night, sat in bed clutching the covers like a child and listening as the knocks came like clockwork, more insistent, now louder, closer, as though the thing outside was growing impatient. And I started keeping the lights on, playing music to drown it out. But it didn't matter, because the moment the clock struck 3:03, everything would go dead. Lights, music, phone, even the damn clock would stop ticking, and I'd sit there, paralyzed, waiting for the knocks to come, which they always did. And the worst part wasn't the fear or the insomnia or the creeping madness that began to set in. It was that after a week, I started to look forward to it, to expect it, to feel Uneasy if I didn't hear the knocks, because at least when she knocked I knew where she was, and I didn't have to wonder if she had already gotten inside. It was after the 8th night that I realized this wasn't going to stop on its own, that whatever was happening to me wasn't a coincidence, or a hallucination, or a string of bad dreams disguising themselves as memories, but something more deliberate, something intelligent and cruel, like a spider that doesn't need to spin a web because it knows exactly where you'll step. And by then I had stopped pretending that I didn't know it was her, the woman behind the door, because while I had never seen her, never so much as caught a glimpse of her shadow through the stained glass window, or heard her voice from the other side, I could feel her, and I knew she was a woman the same way you know when you're being watched, not because of any physical clue, but because something ancient inside you wakes up and whispers it to your bones. And every night I sat in the dark, waiting for the clock to freeze at 3:03, waiting for the sound of her knuckles against the wood, and every night I told myself I wouldn't open the door, no matter how curious or desperate or lonely I became. But something about the way she knocked, slow, methodical, like a lullaby turned inside out, made it harder each time to resist. And by the 10th night I began hearing whispers in the silence, not words exactly, but soft breaths woven into the air, like someone exhaling just inches from my ear, and the hairs on the back of my neck would rise long before the knocking began, as though my body knew she was already on the porch, waiting, watching, hoping I would slip just once, just long enough to turn the knob and let her in. But I didn't. I never did, though I came close, my fingers brushing the metal, my thoughts a tangle of what-ifs and maybes, until I jerked myself away like I'd touched a flame, and I would stumble back up the stairs and collapse into bed, heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to warn me of something even worse, waiting behind her presence, something I wasn't ready to name yet. And as the days passed, the house began to change, subtly at first, pictures slightly, tilted when I knew I hadn't touched them, shadows where there shouldn't be any, the sound of footsteps above me when I was alone downstairs. But it escalated quickly, and soon I was waking to find the front door cracked open, even though I'd latched it the night before, or lights flickering violently until they exploded in a shower of glass, or my reflection in the hallway mirror smiling a second too late, as if it were lagging behind like a video buffer on a slow connection. And one night, just before the knocking, I heard her humming, a soft melody that didn't belong to any song I knew, rising and falling with such sorrow and longing that I found myself crying without understanding why, tears leaking down my face like grief for something I couldn't remember losing, and I knew deep in the hollow of my gut that this was her way of softening me, of eroding the wall I'd built between us, because her presence wasn't content to stay outside anymore. No, she wanted in, not just into the house, but into my thoughts, into my life, into me. And I began seeing things during the day, flashes of her in the corner of my vision, always in the same place, the end of the upstairs hallway, where the light never quite reached and the wallpaper had begun to peel like shedding skin. And sometimes I'd hear a faint knock coming from the closet or the bathroom door, places she shouldn't be able to reach, and I'd open them slowly, hand trembling, heart clawing at my ribs, only to find nothing but the oppressive feeling that something had just left the room, and the dreams started soon after. Dreams of a woman standing in a field of black flowers, her back turned to me, head tilted, humming that same eerie lullaby. And no matter how many times I called out to her, no matter how loud I screamed, she would never turn around, never show me her face, until I began waking in the exact same position every morning, arms outstretched toward the ceiling, as if reaching for something just out of sight. And I realized that I was slowly losing my grip on what was real and what wasn't, and maybe that was the point. Maybe she wanted to wear me down until I couldn't tell the difference, until the only reality I had left was the one she created, and I started avoiding the front door altogether, boarded it up, nailed shut every edge, placed heavy furniture against it as a barricade, and moved through the house, like a prisoner, keeping to the back rooms and sleeping in the guest bedroom just to stay away from her chosen entry point. But no matter where I went, the knocking still came, louder now, more insistent, vibrating through the walls and floor, like it was inside, the bones of the house, and the worst part, the part that made me want to tear out my own ears, was that the knocking no longer came from the front door, but from the walls, from inside the damn walls, as if she had found a way in, not through the threshold, but through the cracks and crevices, through the spaces I didn't think to guard. And every night at 3:03 I would wake to that sound, the sharp rap of knuckles against plaster, the humming growing closer, louder, echoing through the pipes and vents until I thought I would go mad from it. And still I refused to speak her name, because I didn't know it yet, but I had the terrible sense that once I did, it would be like opening a door I couldn't close. And some nights, when the moon was high and the house groaned in its sleep, I could swear I heard another voice beneath hers, deeper, guttural, something ancient and angry, like she wasn't alone anymore, like she had brought something else with her, and that whatever this was, whatever she was, it had been waiting for a long time for someone like me to come along. By the time the knocking started to echo from within the walls themselves, I had already stopped pretending that this was just some external presence trying to gain access to my home, because it wasn't about the door anymore. It was about the house, about me, and every inch of the place seemed to respond to her rhythm like it had grown a pulse of its own. Something deep and ancient awakening in the bones of the floorboards and the copper veins of the plumbing. And I began to understand that the house was no longer a passive structure, but a kind of living organism now, a conduit, or maybe a collaborator, complicit in her arrival. And the deeper I tried to retreat into silence, the louder her influence became, so much so that I started keeping every light on day and night just to ward off the creeping shadows that seemed to twist and curl in the corners when I wasn't looking directly at them, moving just slow enough to stay unseen, but fast enough to let me know they were always there, watching, waiting. And during the day, I would wander the house like a ghost myself, disoriented and half awake, too afraid to leave, yet too exhausted to stay. And I started noticing strange symbols etched into the wallpaper beneath the peeling edges, crude and shallow carvings that I swear hadn't been there before, jagged spirals and interlocking circles that throbbed slightly when I looked at them too long, and when I tried to scrub them away or paint over them, they'd just reappear the next day, sharper and deeper, like they were feeding on my attention. And worse still, the layout of the house began to shift, subtly at first. A hallway a foot longer than it used to be, a room with one too many windows. But then I opened a door expecting the laundry room and found a staircase I'd never seen before spiraling downward into impossible darkness. And though I slammed the door and blocked it with a heavy chair, the next time I passed that hallway, the door was gone, as if it had never existed. And I began to feel like I was unraveling, like my memories of the place were no longer reliable, overwritten somehow by whatever force was nesting in the walls and growing stronger by the night. And every evening at 3:03 the knocking returned, sometimes soft and hesitant like a child asking to come inside, other times violent and enraged, rattling the hinges and shaking the frame. And one night I made the mistake of answering, not the door, but her, whispering a single word into the darkness as I stood on the other side of the barricaded entryway. "Why?" And I swear to God she responded, not in words but in a long, trembling breath that passed through the cracks in the wood and over my skin like cold steam, carrying with it a scent I will never forget, damp earth, burnt hair, and the coppery sting of old blood. And my knees buckled as my mind filled with images I couldn't possibly have conjured on my own. Flashes of a woman weeping in a bathtub surrounded by flickering candles, of a child's hand dragging across a fogged-up mirror, of a mouth sewn shut with rusted wire. And though I told myself they were just hallucinations brought on by lack of sleep or stress, part of me knew better. Part of me knew that she had shown me a piece of her world, or her past, or her prison, and that she was trying to pull me into it, to blur the line between her reality and mine until there was no line left at all. And the next day I found a journal in the attic, one I had never seen before, despite living here for 3 years, tucked behind a loose brick and bound in cracked leather, its pages yellowed and brittle, and the handwriting inside was frantic and slanted, written by someone clearly at the edge of madness, describing visits from a woman at 3:03 a.m., a presence that started with knocking and ended with the complete unraveling of time and space inside the home. And each entry became more disjointed, more obsessed, and the last page simply said, "If you hear her knock, it's already too late," followed by a crude drawing of a figure with long black hair standing in front of a door, her head split, open and something climbing out of it, and I dropped the journal and ran from the attic, heart hammering like a jackhammer in my chest. And as I sprinted down the stairs, I heard a second set of footsteps echoing behind me, even though I was alone, heavier than mine, too heavy to belong to her. And I knew then that the thing she brought with her, or the thing inside her, was now walking freely through my house. And I started locking every door and window twice over, not that I thought it would matter, not anymore. And the knocking grew bolder, more frequent, not just at 3:03, but at random times throughout the day. A single knock here, 3 in rapid succession there, always from behind a door I didn't remember closing. And the mirrors began to act strangely too, not just lagging behind my movements, but distorting my reflection slightly, warping my face so that my eyes looked sunken and black, my mouth too, wide. And once I looked away for only a moment, and when I turned back, the reflection hadn't moved. It just stood there staring back at me with a smile that wasn't mine, and I shattered the mirror with a wrench, only to find the same distorted reflection, waiting for me in every other reflective surface in the house, like she had infected my very image. And I began sleeping in the bathtub, with the curtain closed and a flashlight gripped tightly in my hand, afraid to be anywhere with a door that could knock, afraid to dream, because even my sleep had turned against me, pulling me into long stretches of dark corridors filled with whispers and the echo of knocking that came from inside my own skull. And in one dream, I opened a door and found a version of myself nailed to the floor, mouth wide open in a silent scream as shadowy hands reached up from beneath the floorboards to drag me under, and I would wake drenched in sweat, sometimes with scratches on my arms or a bloody nose, and I started to wonder if I was even waking at all, or if I was still, trapped in some twisted loop of her design. And then came the night I found her name, or maybe she gave it to me. I don't know which is worse, but it was written on the bathroom wall in condensation after a particularly long shower, just a single word, Leora. And the moment I said it aloud, the lights died across the entire house, plunging me into silence so deep I could hear the blood moving in my ears. And from the center of the darkness came the slow, deliberate sound of footsteps walking directly toward me, followed by her voice, soft and musical, and somehow inside my head, whispering, "Finally." And then I was screaming, not because of fear, but because I just knew, that everything up until this point had been her waiting. And now that I'd spoken her name, I had opened the last door, and she was no longer knocking. She was coming in. After that night, the one where I spoke her name and everything inside the house seemed to draw breath and exhale, in one synchronized shudder of dread, I stopped pretending that this was a haunting in any traditional sense, because it was no longer just about her. It was about me, about something I had unknowingly called, opened or unearthed, by staying in this house. And from that point forward, Leora didn't wait for 3:03 anymore. Her presence blanketed the house at all hours, slipping between floorboards, seeping through electrical sockets, humming in the static of the television even when it wasn't plugged in. And I started to hear her voice, not whispering directly, but bleeding in through the ambient noise of everything else, the click of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the gentle swirl of water in the toilet tank. Every noise had an undertone, a second sound riding just beneath it like a parasite, and that sound was her, muttering fragments of sentences I couldn't fully understand, but which always made my skin crawl, things like, "He never saw the window open," and "the heart still beats even after it's been removed," and my sleep stopped entirely because the dreams had become too vivid, too real, and worse, they started to bleed back into reality, so that things I saw while asleep would be there when I woke, like the shadow of a noose swinging above my bed or muddy footprints on the ceiling. And I tried staying awake with energy drinks and caffeine pills, but after 72 hours my body revolted, shutting me down into short bursts of involuntary unconsciousness that left me disoriented and sweating. And in those minutes Leora took full advantage, whispering directly into my ears while I slept, calling me by names I didn't recognize but felt uncomfortably familiar, names like husband, and vessel and penance, and I began to question my own memories, to wonder if there was something I had done, some crime I couldn't remember, that had tethered her to me like a curse, and my paranoia spiraled into obsession as I tore through old photo albums and documents, trying to find any hint that I had been somewhere or someone else before I moved here. But no matter how deep I dug, everything checked out on the surface. Drivers, license, tax forms, birth certificate, but it all felt placed like props in a set, as if the narrative of my life had been hastily assembled just enough to keep me from questioning it until it was too late. And then one day, I found a photograph that I know for a fact should not have existed. A black and white picture slipped between 2 pages of a forgotten yearbook I don't even remember owning. And in the photo was a woman with hair like spilled ink, standing in front of a house that looked exactly like mine, except older, more decayed, with boarded windows and a warped porch, and scratched into the bottom of the photo in what looked like a child's handwriting were the words, Leora's home. He came through the wrong door. And I dropped the book and backed away so fast I knocked over a chair, because behind the woman in the photo, barely visible through a second-story window, was me, not a younger version, not a relative, but me exactly as I looked now, watching her from inside a house that shouldn't have existed yet, and the realization hit me like a freight train. I hadn't moved into the house. I had been pulled here, funneled through some reality that Leora controlled, and what I thought was a simple wrong turn all those months ago was actually a trap. And every choice I'd made since arriving had been hers, laid out like breadcrumbs in a maze of horrors designed to isolate and unravel me. And the house, her house, was more than bricks and wood. It was a psychic construction, a place that could bend and shift according to her will, responding to her moods like a living thing. And that's when the rooms began to repeat themselves, looping endlessly no matter which door I took, so that I'd exit the kitchen only to walk directly back into it. The details slightly off each time, the clock missing its hands, the fridge humming a melody in reverse, the light bulb flickering in a perfect Morse code that spelled my name again and again and again. And no matter how fast I ran or how many times I screamed, there was no escape, because the house was no longer a space. It was a loop, a prison, and I was the inmate serving a sentence I didn't understand for a crime I couldn't recall. And on the 4th night of the looping kitchen, I decided to test her, to push back. So I smashed every plate, tore down every cabinet door, pulled the fridge from the wall and unplugged it, set the clock on fire and tossed the flames into the sink. And then I stepped through the door, expecting the next kitchen in the sequence. But instead I found myself in a room I had never seen before, a square, windowless chamber lined with mirrors that didn't reflect me, but rather versions of her, Leora, in different stages of life and death, young and crying, middle-aged and laughing maniacally, ancient and rotting with worms crawling from her mouth. And in the center of the room was a single wooden chair and a note taped to it, scrawled in the same handwriting as the photo: "Sit and remember, or stand and forget." And against every ounce of logic I had left, I sat down, and the moment I did, the mirrors began to bleed, thick black ichor running down the glass like tears as each reflection of Leora began to whisper in unison, "Do you remember now?" And the floodgates of memory cracked open, just a sliver, enough to let something ancient and vile slip through, a vision of a cabin deep in the woods, a night drenched in lightning, and a ritual, a circle of fire, and a book bound in human skin, and a girl screaming as she was dragged from the flames and cast into the earth like an offering, and me standing over her, hands bloody, eyes empty. And I knew with every fiber of my being that it had happened, that I had been there, that I had helped them bind her soul to this plane, and now she had found me again. And the knocking was never her asking to come in. It was her asking me to let her out. And I had refused. I had forgotten. I had buried the memory beneath a fabricated life, but the debt was unpaid. And the moment I stood from that chair, the room vanished, and I was back in the house, the real house, or what was left of it. Every wall pulsating with a heartbeat not my own, the air thick with rot and heat, and from the top of the stairs I heard her voice, clear and loud for the first time. You sat. You remembered. Now burn! And the hallway burst into flames. Not with fire, but with shadows, living darkness that clawed at my skin and screamed in voices I recognized as my own, past and future selves tormented and stitched together by guilt. And I ran, not to escape, but to find her, to end it, because I knew now that this would never stop until one of us was gone, and I could feel the house contracting, pulling tighter, like lungs drawing their final breath before a scream. And at the center of it all, I knew she was waiting, her hand still knocking even though the door had long since burned away. When the fire of shadow subsided, and the last echoes of her voice melted back into the creaking bones of the house, I found myself in the hallway again, or something that resembled it, except it wasn't aligned to gravity anymore, tilted at a 45-degree angle like the entire structure had been violently shifted, and the walls were no longer plaster, tanned paint, but raw meat and bone, pulsating with wet breath and twitching slightly under the surface as if something enormous was sleeping just below, and the floor squelched beneath my shoes, soaking them in a warm, viscous fluid that smelled of decay and iron and something that reminded me of childhood nightmares I'd never fully shaken. And ahead of me, deeper into this tilted corridor of rot, was a door. A new door, one I had never seen before, carved from what looked like old wood, but glistening with veins that throbbed beneath the grain like a heart still barely alive. And, carved into it with some crude tool, was a sentence: "She's waiting where you left her." And I didn't want to open it, I swear to God. Every cell in my body screamed to turn back, to claw my way back up the tilt and out of this nightmare. But the house groaned behind me. The meat wall pressed tighter, and I could feel it closing like a throat about to swallow, so I grabbed the handle, slick with some mucus-like secretion, and pulled it open. And what lay beyond was not a room but a tunnel, descending at an impossible angle, deeper than any basement could feasibly go, and lined with flickering lights that pulsed in time with my heartbeat. A heartbeat that was no longer entirely mine, because I could feel something else in sync with it, something that beat in the walls, in the floor, in her. And as I moved down the tunnel, gravity shifted again until I no longer knew what direction was up or down, and the passage grew narrower the further I descended, until I had to crawl on hands and knees through the heat and wet stink of something alive. And then suddenly it opened into a cavern, a massive open space with a ceiling so high it was lost in darkness. And all around the edge of this cavern were doors, hundreds, maybe thousands of them, all mismatched. Some modern, some ancient, some from cultures I didn't even recognize, and each door was slowly, rhythmically shaking, as if something on the other side was knocking, each one at once, creating a chorus of soft thump-thump-thump sounds that echoed like heartbeat drums. And in the center of the cavern was a spiral staircase made of bone and rusted metal, leading down into a pit so black it seemed to eat the light. And I knew with that dream logic certainty that she was at the bottom, waiting for me to come to her, waiting for the moment I'd remember everything, and not just the pieces she'd shown me, but the truth I had buried, why I had helped bury her, why I had cast her out. And that truth was wrapped in something worse than guilt, choice, because I hadn't been forced to do what I did. I had chosen to, and whatever penance I was paying now was a fraction of what I owed. And as I took each step down the spiral, the air grew colder, not with the chill of winter or death, but with the cold of being forgotten, abandoned, unloved, a psychic frost that crawled into my bones and whispered old doubts, memories of every time I'd turned away from someone who needed me, every moment I'd chosen myself over someone else, until I was surrounded by ghost versions of people I had let down, friends I'd betrayed, strangers I'd ignored. And at the base of the stairs was a pool, smooth and black like oil, perfectly still, and floating in the center was a door unlike the others. This one made of glass, entirely transparent, and behind it was her face, watching me with eyes that never blinked, that didn't need to blink. And she whispered without speaking, lips unmoving, but the words clear. "I'm the weight you carry. Let me in." And when I touched the door, it shattered without a sound, the shards falling into the pool and vanishing, and then the water rose, not like a flood, but like a hand, reaching for me, grabbing me by the ankles and pulling me in. And suddenly I was submerged, not in liquid, but in memory. scenes rushing past me like film on fast forward, ritual circles, chanting, fire, screaming, a girl tied to a chair in the middle of a symbol drawn in blood and salt, me holding the book, me reciting the words, and her face, Leora's face, staring up at me, not with fear but betrayal, as if we had known each other once, deeply, personally, and I had used that connection to sacrifice her, to use her as a key to something else, and now she was back, not for revenge but for completion, because the ritual had never been finished, and her soul had been left in limbo, trapped in the knocking, forced to beg for release every night, at 3:03, and I had ignored her cries, denied her closure, and now the only way forward was to let her in, to open the final door, not just the metaphysical one, but the literal door upstairs, the one she knocked on each night. And when I awoke, because I did somehow awaken from that submerged nightmare, I was lying at the base of my real stairs, the wooden ones in the house, my mouth full of dirt, my hands bloodied from clawing at something in my sleep, and I looked at the clock on the wall, 3:02 a.m., and I knew what I had to do, not out of courage, but resignation. The way a prisoner walks the final mile, knowing the end was always coming, and as the second ticked over to 3:03, the knock came slow, deliberate, expectant. And I stood, walked to the door, placed my hand on the knob and whispered, "I remember." And on the other side she whispered back, "Then let me finish." And I turned the knob. The door opened, with a slow groan that didn't belong to hinges or wood, but to something deeper, something buried beneath the laws of physics and sanity. And what stood on the threshold wasn't a girl, wasn't even human in the way memory had painted her, but a figure woven from grief, formed of shadows and long tangled strands of hair that dripped like wet roots, her skin like wax melted and cooled 100 times over, stretching oddly over bone and angles that didn't line up right, and her eyes, God, her eyes weren't angry or vengeful, but unbearably sad, as if she carried centuries of mourning in them, and I didn't move, didn't breathe, as she stepped inside, her bare feet leaving no prints on the floor but warping the air around her like heat, and the temperature dropped with every inch she moved further into the house, until my breath came out in clouds and frost curled on the edges of the furniture. And then, as if the entire structure felt her presence, the walls groaned, the lights dimmed to the faintest glow, and somewhere in the distance upstairs, a door slammed shut on its own, and she turned to me, not fast, not threatening, but with a slow, deliberate grace, and raised a single finger to her lips as if to say, "Quiet now. They'll hear us." And suddenly I wasn't alone in the room. With her I was surrounded by them, things that hadn't come through the door but had followed her through the cracks in time, in memory, in my own mind, tall figures that didn't cast shadows, whose limbs bent backward and whose mouths were stitched shut with what looked like thorns, and they hovered at the edges of my vision like hallucinations too real to ignore, and one of them leaned forward with no sound and passed a long, spindly hand through my chest, not touching my body, but dragging something out of me, an emotion, a memory, a sliver of myself. And I fell to the floor gasping as if I'd just lost a lung, and Leora, or the thing that wore her face, reached out and gently placed a hand on my forehead, and for a moment the world blinked out like a TV shutting off. And when it returned, I was standing in my childhood bedroom, but not the way I remembered it. This version was decayed, covered in ash and soot, the wallpaper peeling away to reveal brick-charred black, and my bed was on fire but not burning, the flames frozen in place like a paused image, and I could feel something watching me from the closet, not with hostility but expectation, and the air was filled with a rhythmic knocking, not from one place, but from everywhere. The walls, the floor, the sky itself, and each knock rattled my bones like it was tuning them, adjusting me to receive some terrible message. And when the closet door creaked open, I saw her again. Not Leora, but the other one, the one I'd seen in dreams before this all began. The one who whispered from the corners of mirrors and showed up in the background of old photos with eyes too wide, and she spoke in a voice made of overlapping whispers. "You were the vessel. You were always the vessel." And she reached out with a hand of splinters and pulled me back through the bedroom, through the door, through memory and space, and I collapsed again in the hallway of my real house, vomiting black bile. That smelled like burning hair, and Leora knelt beside me, brushing the hair from my face like a mother would a feverish child. And then she whispered something I couldn't hear, but understood anyway. The knocking had never been her trying to get in. It was a warning, a desperate attempt to keep them out, to alert me that every time I ignored the sound or tried to hide, the barrier between their world and ours thinned just a little more, and now it was paper thin, and they were inside, feeding off me, nesting. In the places where my memory failed and my guilt festered, and unless I reversed the ritual, unless I remembered exactly what we had done and why, they would not only consume me, but spread, using my house, my body, my voice as a beacon for others. And Leora's form flickered then, becoming two images at once, one of the girl I'd known and sacrificed, and one of something vast and unspeakable that shimmered with eyes and mouths, and wings that beat against dimensions. And she said, "The house is not a house anymore." And when I looked up, she was right. The ceiling was gone, replaced by a swirling vortex of faces and doorways and staircases that led to nowhere, and the floor beneath my feet was now bone, polished and white, a cathedral of the dead, and each step I took made the structure change, shifting and rearranging, like a puzzle trying to solve itself. And I realized I was inside the ritual now, not performing it, but living it. And if I didn't finish it before 3:03 a.m. that night, the knock wouldn't come. It wouldn't need to, because the door would never close again, and the world would slowly begin to dream of them, and in dreaming, let them in. And as the walls began to breathe again, and the knocking returned, now, more urgent, more frantic, I looked at the clock and it read 2:41 a.m. The seconds seemed to stretch, each one heavy with the weight of impending doom, like the ticking of the clock in the corner was somehow stretching the fabric of time itself, pulling the minutes apart until they bled together into an unrecognizable mass of dread. My eyes were fixed on the clock, the jagged, blinking numbers counting down to the inevitable moment. I wanted to move, to do something, anything, but my body was frozen, caught in the web of my own memories and fears, as if the room had turned into a living entity, its walls pressing in on me, narrowing the air around me until I could barely breathe. Leora's presence, or whatever had taken her form, seemed to draw closer with each second, her figure now a shifting combination of the girl I had known and the thing she had become, a distortion that felt like it could bend reality itself. The air around us pulsed with a vibration I could feel deep within my chest, like the sound of a distant bell ringing, growing louder with every beat. I could no longer tell where the walls ended and the darkness began, as though the house itself had dissolved into this endless stretch of nowhere, and I was standing in the center of it, suspended in the eye of an oncoming storm. The knocking continued, the low thumps echoing in my ears, but now they sounded different, closer, more desperate, as if the very fabric of the house was shaking under the weight of whatever was coming through, as if the walls themselves were becoming more and more fragile, their integrity slipping with every passing moment. The house no longer felt like a home. It felt like a trap, an ancient prison designed to keep something in, to keep it hidden, away from prying eyes. But I knew now. The knocking had never been about letting it in. It was about keeping me in, keeping me trapped in this space between worlds, between them and me. I could feel them, lurking just behind the veil, their eyes pressing against the walls, their breath hot on the back of my neck. I could hear them now, whispering my name in voices I recognized. Old friends, long-lost relatives, voices of people I had buried in my mind, voices that had once comforted me, now twisted into something sinister. But there was something even, worse than the voices, worse than the strange creatures lurking just beyond the darkness. It was the feeling. The overwhelming sense that I had been here before, not just in this room or this house, but in this very moment. The clock was ticking louder now, each second marking the slow, agonizing approach of 3:03 a.m., and I could feel the pull, the urge, to do something, to act before the moment passed, but I didn't know what to do. Everything had become so disjointed, so tangled, that I couldn't make sense of it anymore. I didn't know what was real, and what was just a manifestation of my fractured mind. Was the knocking real? Was she real? Was this entire place a figment of some twisted version of my reality? some trap I had built for myself with my own actions, my own decisions. But then, a voice broke through the fog, sharp and clear, cutting through the haze like a knife. "Let her in." It was Leora's voice, but not the voice I had heard before, not the whispering, sorrowful tone. It was different now. It was demanding, urgent, like a plea from the deepest part of her being. And as I looked into her eyes, I saw something else there, a reflection of myself, of my own guilt, my own desperation. The pieces were beginning to fall into place, and I understood. This wasn't just about Leora. This was about me. It had always been about me. I was the one who had closed the door all those years ago. I was the one who had cut her off from the world, from the light. I was the one who had chosen to forget her, to bury her, to let the darkness consume her. But now, as the knocking grew louder, I realized the truth. The truth was that I hadn't let her go. I hadn't forgotten her. She had never left me. She had been knocking all this time, in every corner of my mind, in every dark corner of my life, waiting for me to remember, waiting for me to finish what we had started. And now, as the door behind me creaked open, and I felt a cold wind sweep past me, I knew what I had to do. The time had come. I had to let her in. I had to face the consequences of my actions. But as I took a step forward, I realized something. They were already here. The knocking wasn't just Leora's anymore. It was everyone's. The thing that had followed her in had already taken root, and now the house was not just a house, it was a beacon, a portal, and I was the anchor, the keeper of the door. And I had no idea what would happen when I opened it, but one thing was certain: the world was about to change. I had no choice but to walk through it. The knock echoed through the house again, a sharp, jarring sound that rattled my bones. It was no longer just a simple noise. It was a presence, a force that reverberated through the very walls of the house. The door stood before me, its wooden frame cracked and splintered, like it had been waiting for this moment, this precise time. I felt the pulse of something otherworldly as I took a hesitant step toward it, the air thick with an ancient energy I could barely comprehend. Leora's eyes, those eyes that had once been full of sorrow, now held something darker, something ancient. She was no longer the innocent girl I had known. She had become something else, something far beyond human comprehension, a being of both beauty and terror, a twisted reflection of everything I had buried in myself. But I couldn't look away. I didn't want to. Her presence was magnetic, pulling me toward the door, urging me to open it, to let her in. But as I stood there, my hand on the cold handle, I realized that this wasn't just about Leora anymore. This was about everything I had been running from, everything I had tried to forget. The knocking was louder now, more insistent, as though something was trying to break through, trying to claw its way into my reality. I could feel the air growing, heavier, thicker, as if the house itself was closing in on me, squeezing me into a corner where there was no escape. The knocking didn't just come from the door anymore. It was everywhere. It came from the walls, the floor, even the windows. And with each passing second, it seemed to grow closer, more real. The clock on the wall ticked with an unrelenting rhythm, its hands frozen at 3:02 a.m., just 1 minute away from the inevitable. The room felt like it was spinning, my vision blurring, and in the midst of it all, Leora whispered again, her voice low and haunting. "It's too late to turn back now. The door will open whether you want it to or not. The barrier between us is gone, and when it opens, they will come." I didn't know if she meant the creatures that had followed her into the house or something even worse. All I knew was that I could feel them. They were here. They had always been here, lurking in the corners of my mind, waiting for me to open the door. But even as fear gripped my chest, there was another feeling, something I hadn't expected: relief. A sense that, at last, something was about to be revealed, something that had been hidden from me for years. The mystery of the knocking, the haunting dreams, the things that had followed Leora into this house, all of it would finally make sense. My fingers trembled as I grasped the doorknob, and as I twisted it slowly, the door creaked open with a sound that was both a sigh and a scream, the dark corridor beyond spilling into the room like a flood. I stepped through, knowing that once I crossed the threshold, there would be no turning back. The floor beneath my feet was cold, slick with something I couldn't identify, something that felt wrong, like it was alive, pulsing beneath the surface. I couldn't see the end of the corridor. It stretched into the blackness, a void that seemed to consume the light. The walls were covered in strange symbols, ancient carvings that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them, moving like whispers on the edge of my vision. The knocking had stopped, but the silence that followed was deafening, a vacuum that swallowed every sound, every breath. I wasn't alone here. I could feel them watching me, lurking just beyond the reach of the darkness. But I didn't turn. Around, I couldn't. The pull to move forward was too strong, and I kept walking, deeper into the abyss until I felt the floor beneath me shift, like the building itself was alive, and the walls started to close in. I could feel the temperature drop with every step, my breath coming out in misty clouds, my heart hammering in my chest, as though my body was trying to keep up with the rapid, overwhelming pulse of fear coursing through me. Then, ahead, I saw it, a light, faint and flickering like the last breath of a dying flame. I moved toward it instinctively, as though it were pulling me forward, calling me home. But as I drew closer, I realized with growing horror that the light wasn't warm. It was cold, as if it were drawing the warmth from the very air around me. And in the center of it, standing tall, was a figure I knew too well. It was Leora again, but not as she had been. She was no longer just a girl caught between worlds. She was a thing now, a creature made of light and shadow, her body flickering in and out of existence like a flame caught in the wind, and her eyes, the same eyes that had once been full of sadness, now held only a cold, indifferent emptiness, as if she had become something other entirely. "It's too late," she whispered, her voice echoing around me, bouncing off the walls, filling my ears with a deafening buzz. "You've opened the door, and now you'll have to face what's waiting on the other side." Her hand stretched toward me, and in that moment, I knew. I knew that this wasn't just about Leora anymore. It wasn't about the knocking, or the things that had followed her into the house. This was about me. The door had never been about releasing her. It had always been about what I had kept locked away in myself, my fears, my regrets, my guilt. And now there was nowhere to hide. I reached for her hand, not knowing if I was reaching for salvation or damnation, but I knew one thing: it was time to finish what had started. And with that thought, the light swallowed me whole. The darkness closed in around me, wrapping me in its cold embrace, but I didn't feel afraid, at least not in the way I should have. No, this felt different. This felt like an inevitability, a path that had been set long before my arrival. The light, so stark and unforgiving, illuminated everything around me in sharp contrasts. Shadows, that shouldn't have been there. Flickering shapes that danced at the edge of my vision. As I stood there, caught in the strange glow of that otherworldly light, I realized something horrifying. I had already crossed over. The house, the door, even Leora, they were all parts of a much larger puzzle, and I had just stepped into the very heart of it. The thing that had been knocking at my door every night, that insistent thud at 3:03 a.m., it wasn't just her. It wasn't just about Leora's sorrow, or the twisted figures that seemed to emerge from the dark corners of the house. It was about me. I had sealed my own fate when I decided to push her away, to lock her out of my life. That was when the door between our worlds had started to creak open, and every night as the clock struck 3:03, I had been hearing the echo of that decision, a haunting reminder of what I had done. I wasn't sure how long I had been standing, there frozen in place, staring into the light. It could have been seconds, and it could have been hours. Time had become meaningless here. The only thing that mattered was the growing pressure in my chest, the suffocating feeling that I was no longer in control, that I had relinquished my hold on the world I thought I knew. My thoughts were interrupted by a soft, almost inaudible whisper, Leora's voice, distant yet close. "You shouldn't have come." I blinked, and the room seemed to shift, like the walls were bending in on themselves, warping in a way that defied all logic. The light flickered again, and for a moment, the world around me seemed to fracture like broken glass. But then it settled, and the figure of Leora stood before me once more, though she seemed even more detached. her form now translucent, like smoke caught in a breeze. The air around her pulsed, a strange rhythm that seemed to echo the beating of my heart, each thump sending ripples through the space. "You don't understand," she continued, her voice full of sorrow, but there was something more now, something darker, deeper in the way she spoke. "This is where it all ends, where it all begins. You've already opened it, there's no turning back now." Her words cut through me like ice, but there was no fear in them, just the finality of a truth I had been trying to avoid. I had always been running from something, hadn't I? The knocking, the fear that had grown with every passing day, it had all led me here. It was never about Leora. It was never about the house. It was about me, my choices, my past, and the fact that I had never fully acknowledged the things I had buried deep inside. But now, standing in this strange, liminal place between worlds, there was no more denying it. The reality I had once known had cracked open, revealing the true nature of the darkness I had been too scared to face. Leora wasn't the only one who had been trapped here. I had too, I just didn't realize it until now. "They're coming," Leora's voice whispered again, this time with a hint of something darker, more menacing. "The ones who were always waiting. And when they come, there will be no room left for you. You won't even remember your own name, your own face. You'll be lost like me." The light around her flickered one last time, and in that moment the shadows in the room seemed to stretch toward me, wrapping around my legs, my arms, their cold fingers digging into my skin, pulling me deeper into the darkness. My pulse quickened, my breath shallow, as the floor beneath me seemed to tremble, as though something immense was moving just beneath the surface. I tried to move, to push against the encroaching darkness, but it was no use. I was paralyzed, trapped in the space between what was real and what wasn't. The room stretched on endlessly, the light growing weaker, and the shadows deepened until they consumed everything, leaving nothing but a choking, suffocating blackness. Then, just as I thought I could bear it no longer, I heard the knock again. The same sound, now louder, closer, more insistent than ever. But this time there was something else, something more. It wasn't just at the door, it was in the walls, in the floor. It was everywhere, and I could feel it closing in around me, the pressure building, the fear choking me from every angle. And with the next knock, the door behind me swung open and the world shifted again. The reality I had known, the house, the town, was gone. I was no longer in control. The knocking had become something else entirely, something that was no longer just a sound. It had become the very pulse of the world I was in now. A dark, twisted pulse that would never stop, no matter how much I wished it to. And that was when I understood the truth. There was no escape. The knocking had always been a signal, a call, not to Leora, not to anyone. It was a call to me, to bring me here. And now that I had answered, I would never leave. I would never be allowed to. The door had opened and I had crossed over, and once you've crossed, you never truly return. The moment I crossed through the door, the world as I knew it ceased to exist. The house, the familiar streets, everything that had once made sense, gone. It was replaced by an endless expanse of shadows, a realm so suffocating that the air itself seemed to thicken, like I was breathing in something heavy, something ancient. I wasn't sure what was real anymore, if any of it was real, or if it was all just a dream that I couldn't wake up from. But even as the darkness enveloped me, there was a sense of clarity, a cold understanding that settled in the pit of my stomach. I had made a choice, and now it was too late to take it back. The knocking had stopped. The eerie silence that followed was worse. It was a silence that stretched, that bent and twisted, making the air feel thicker and more oppressive with each passing second. The shadows around me weren't just shadows. They were alive, moving, breathing, and watching me from all directions. They didn't have faces, didn't need them. Their presence was enough. I could feel their eyes on me even if I couldn't see them. The weight of them bore down on me, and I felt an instinctual urge to run, but there was nowhere to run to. The ground beneath me was uneven, the floor shifting beneath my feet like it wasn't truly solid, as though the very foundation of this place was as unstable as my sanity. I stumbled forward, every step feeling like a struggle against invisible forces that tried to pull me back. to keep me trapped in this liminal space. I wanted to scream, but the words wouldn't come. It was as though the air had stolen them from me, replaced them with a hollow, empty silence that matched the bleak emptiness of the world I was now in. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see Leora there, watching me, her once sorrowful face now twisted into something darker. But she was gone, vanished, as if she had never been there at all. Or perhaps it was I who had been swallowed by this place, and she had never existed in the first place. I couldn't tell anymore. The house, the town, the knocking, it all felt like a distant memory, something too far gone to ever truly understand. I could feel the darkness closing in around me, but there was something else too, something that felt like the very fabric of reality itself was being torn. The edges of my vision warped, the world flickering in and out of focus like a broken television set, the light too bright and too dark all at once. The ground trembled again, and I staggered, unable to maintain my footing. I had crossed into something else. But what? I didn't have time to ponder. The shadows that had been lurking just beyond the edges of my perception began to take form, twisting and contorting into shapes I couldn't fully comprehend, shapes that felt wrong. At first I thought they were just tricks of my mind, hallucinations born from the stress, the fear, the overwhelming weight of the place I had entered. But then they moved, too quickly, too fluidly, and I realized they weren't hallucinations at all. They were real, and they were coming for me. I spun around, heart hammering in my chest, but there was no escape. The corridor stretched on, endlessly in front of me, and the shadows followed, encroaching from all sides. Their movements synchronized, their bodies flickering in and out of the light. They were like parasites, feeding off the very air, the very space between the walls. They seemed to be closing in, tightening the noose around me with every passing second. My breath came in ragged gasps, and panic surged through me like a tidal wave. This wasn't just a dream or a nightmare, it was real. And worse than that, it wasn't just me who was trapped here. It was everyone. Everyone who had come before me, everyone who had made the mistake of opening the door. The knocking had been their call, the one that had beckoned me into this cursed place, the one that had promised me that I too would be trapped forever in this endless loop of fear and darkness with no way out. The shadows were closing in, their forms becoming more defined, more tangible. I could see them now. Twisted, elongated figures with dark, hollow eyes and mouths that seemed to gape open in unnatural angles. They were speaking, though I couldn't hear their words. Their mouths moved, but the sound didn't reach me, and yet I could feel the vibrations in my chest, the low hum of their words settling deep within me, vibrating the very core of my being. I turned and ran, desperate to escape, but the darkness was too thick, too all-consuming. Every step I took only seemed to bring them closer, and no matter how fast I moved, I couldn't outrun them. They were faster, swarming, engulfing the space around me, cutting off my path, hemming me in from every side. The walls themselves seemed to bend, warping like a fever dream, and the ground buckled beneath me, forcing me to my knees. I was being pulled down, dragged into the darkness, and all I could do was struggle against the unseen forces, my hands clawing at the floor, grasping for any sense of reality, any thread of escape. But there was nothing, only the cold, unrelenting grip of the shadows. And then, just when I thought I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, the knocking started again, louder now, more insistent than ever, filling the space with its deafening echo. It came from everywhere, reverberating through the air, through the ground, through my bones. It was no longer just at the door. It was everywhere. The sound of it became a rhythmic pulse, a heartbeat that drowned out everything else. And in that moment I knew. The knocking wasn't just a signal, it was a countdown, a timer ticking away slowly, relentlessly, until the end. The knocking was the final warning, the final reminder that I was never meant to escape. I was meant to stay here, trapped in this endless night, just like all the others who had come before me. Just like Leora. Just like the countless others who had crossed the threshold, opened the door, and never looked back. I wasn't the first, and I wouldn't be the last. Be the last. I couldn't tell how long I had been running, how many steps I had taken, but it felt as though time itself had stopped, had stretched into a never-ending spiral of motion and stillness. My legs burned with the effort, but I couldn't stop. So I had to keep moving. The knocking, relentless, had become something more, something far more sinister than just a call. It was a judgment, a reminder that I was trapped, locked in this place, and the only way out was through the door. But the door was never meant to open. I had crossed that threshold, and now the door would never close again. Every time the sound echoed through the air, it filled me with an intense sense of dread. The rhythm of it felt like a heartbeat, not just a sound but a pulse, a living, breathing entity that thrummed through my entire being, reverberating in my chest, in my bones, in my very soul. The knocking was a sound I couldn't escape, no matter how far I ran or how hard I tried to block it out. It was there, always there, and as the minutes bled into hours, I could feel the pressure of it growing, pressing against me, suffocating me. My mind was unraveling. The darkness around me seemed to stretch into infinity, and with each step I took, the world around me warped, twisted, like I was caught in some kind of terrible loop. The walls, the floor, the air itself, it all felt like a nightmare. I couldn't tell if the knocking was coming from the house anymore or from inside my own head, but it didn't matter. The truth was there was no escape. I had heard it from Leora's lips, whispered through the shadows, and I could feel it now, deep inside of me. There was no way out. This place, this darkness, it was all consuming, and I was just another lost soul wandering its depths. I stumbled again, my vision blurring as I reached out for something, anything to steady myself, but there was nothing to hold on to. The air around me shimmered, and I could feel the temperature dropping, a coldness seeping into my skin, into my very bones. It was like being submerged in ice water, but somehow more suffocating. I felt the shadows close in around me, their presence pressing against me like a physical force. I could hear them now, their whispers just out of reach, filling the silence with their soft murmurs. But I couldn't understand them. They were speaking in languages I didn't recognize, words that felt alien, ancient, twisted in ways that made my skin crawl. I could feel their eyes on me, their gaze cold and merciless, and with each step I felt their hunger, their desire to claim me, to pull me deeper into their fold. And then, just when I thought I couldn't bear it anymore, when the darkness seemed to close in, swallowing me whole, I saw it. The door. The same door I had crossed through, the same door that had led me here. It stood there, in the distance. But it was different now. It wasn't just a door, it was a threshold, a boundary between worlds, between what was and what wasn't. It was the key to my escape, the way out of this nightmare. But as I approached, I realized with a sickening jolt of horror that the door was no longer just a door. It had become something else, something alive, something that was watching me. The knocking came again, louder this time, more insistent. But it wasn't just at the door anymore. It was all around me, echoing in the walls, in the floor, in the very air. The knocking was a sound that was no longer separate from me. It was a part of me now, as if it had always been there, buried deep within me, waiting to be released. I could feel the pulse of it in my veins, in the blood rushing through my body. And as I stepped closer to the door, I realized that the knocking wasn't just a signal. It wasn't just a sound. It was a warning. And it was too late to heed it. I reached for the door, my hand trembling as I grasped the handle, but the moment I touched it, a wave of terror surged through me. It was as though something had opened inside of me, a door within my own mind that had been sealed shut for far too long. I saw flashes of faces, of people I didn't know, of places I had never been, of memories that weren't my own. It was as though the door was showing me everything it had consumed, everything it had taken. And it wasn't just the house or the town. It was everything. The memories, the souls, the very essence of what it had absorbed. And in that moment, I understood. The knocking wasn't a call, it wasn't a countdown. It was the sound of everything that had been taken, everything that had been lost. It was the sound of the door itself calling for more, calling for me to join it, to become part of the darkness, part of the ever-growing hunger. I couldn't let go of the handle. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The door was pulling me in, dragging me closer, and I could feel the darkness trying to consume me. I wasn't the first to step through. I wasn't the first to answer the knock. The door had been opened before, and it would be opened again, and again, and again, until there was nothing left. Until all that remained was the sound of the knocking, echoing through the empty space, calling, always calling for the next one to step through. And in that moment I realized the horrible truth. There would never be an end. There would never be an escape. I would never leave, and neither would anyone else. It was impossible to move. It was as if my body had frozen in place, caught between the door and the darkness, tethered to the threshold I had crossed into. My hand gripped the cold metal handle, but it wasn't the handle anymore. It was a symbol, a link to the horrors that had already taken hold of me, the manifestation of every mistake I had made, every choice that had led me to this point. The knocking was louder now, deafening, filling the space around me with its rhythmic pounding. It was as if the very walls were vibrating with the sound, the air thick with the force of it, and in the midst of the chaos, I could hear the whispers. Again, closer this time, their voices rising above the knocking, their words distorted, unintelligible, as though they were speaking in tongues, a language older than time itself. The shadows around me seemed to press closer, closer to the door, crawling up the walls, creeping along the floor, their presence overwhelming, suffocating. I couldn't see them clearly anymore, not with my eyes, but I could feel them. I could feel their cold breath on the back of my neck, the weight of their gazes pressing against me, the hunger that emanated from them like a palpable force. They were waiting, watching, and I realized with a sickening jolt of horror that I had become part of the story. I had stepped into the narrative, the same one that had claimed every other soul who had come before me, the same one that would claim countless others in the future. The knocking wasn't a warning. It wasn't a call. It was a sign, a mark that I too was now a part of this cursed place, this endless nightmare, and no matter how hard I fought, no matter how much I struggled, I could never escape. The shadows surged forward, their movements synchronized like a wave crashing against a shore, and I was pulled with them. My feet no longer touched the ground, and I felt myself being lifted, carried away, my body weightless, as though gravity itself had ceased to exist. I tried to scream, but the sound didn't come. The air around me had thickened, pressing against my chest, crushing the breath from my lungs, and I felt the pressure building, the weight of it threatening to crush me entirely. The shadows surrounded me, wrapping around my limbs, pulling me deeper into their grasp, and for the first time I could see them, really see them. They were not human, not entirely, but they were something else, something ancient, something that had existed before time itself. Their eyes were black voids, endless and hollow, with no light, no depth, just emptiness. Their mouths, wide and gaping, revealed rows of sharp teeth that seemed to stretch impossibly far, and from those mouths came the sound of the knocking, distorted, warped, as if it were their very language. They were not speaking to me. They were speaking to each other, to the others who had been claimed, to the ones who had answered the knock. I realized too late that I had become part of their world now, an unwilling participant in a cycle that would never end. I wasn't meant to escape. I wasn't meant to leave. The knocking had been a signal, a call to bring me here, and now it was too late. The door behind me was no longer a way out. It was a doorway to a place that didn't exist in the world I once knew. It was a passage into a realm of darkness, of endless torment and suffering. The more I struggled, the more the darkness seemed to tighten its grip on me, until I could no longer breathe, no longer move. It was suffocating, all-encompassing, and I could feel myself slipping away. But even as the darkness closed in, I knew I had to fight. I couldn't give in. I couldn't become another lost soul, another victim of the knocking. I had to break free. With every ounce of strength I had left, I tried to push against the shadows, to break free from their grip. It was hopeless. I felt myself slipping, drowning in the void, and for a moment I thought it was over. But then, just as the last of my strength was spent, something shifted. The knocking stopped. The shadows paused. The world around me seemed to hold its breath. And in that brief moment of silence, I realized something. The knocking had never been about the door. It had never been about what was outside. It had been about what was inside. The door had been a prison, a boundary between worlds, but the real horror wasn't on the other side, it was in me. The knocking had been a reflection of my own fears, my own insecurities, my own guilt, the things that had haunted me long before I ever crossed that threshold. The knocking had been the sound of my own mind unraveling, of my own soul being torn apart by the choices I had made. It had been the sound of my own condemnation. And now, as I stood there, surrounded by the suffocating darkness, I realized that I had always been trapped. Trapped by my own mind, trapped by my own fears, trapped by the very thing that had drawn me to this cursed door in the first place. There was no escape. There had never been an escape. The knocking had always been the end, the final countdown. And now I was no longer the one knocking. I was the one who had been knocked. And as the shadows closed in around me, I knew the truth. There was no escape from the knocking. It had always been a part of me, and it would always be there, ringing in my ears, echoing through my soul forever.